morning, Osmond claimed he didn't remember making the phone call. Police knew Osmond was a violent man, someone capable of murder. After Holman gave birth to their child in 2008, the household spiraled into chaos. Alcohol-fueled domestic violence tore through their lives, leading to the child being taken into foster care. Though the two kept in touch over the years, their relationship was anything but amicable. Osmond harbored a simmering resentment, blaming Holland for their child's removal, a motive that couldn't be ignored. Police knew there was a good chance he was guilty, but with no evidence, they had to come up with a way for him to incriminate himself even further. That was about the time Patty O'Hara came onto the scene, a hard-drinking, petty criminal barfly who had moved into an apartment not far from Osmond's place. O'Hara was a cop, whose real name remains a mystery to all but a chosen few. In 2020, O'Hara started hanging around the bars where Osmond was a regular drinker. He was new to the area and in need of new friends. That's how he met Osmond. One of those first few nights out, Osmond told O'Hara he was struggling for money. No problem, said O'Hara. He could find him some work moving boxes of counterfeit and stolen clothing. After that, they often met for 10-hour drinking sessions at O'Hara's flat, but they would kick back and watch soccer on the TV. O'Hara was perfect, turning into the kind of heavy drinker Osmond felt at home with. He became a lifesaver, often driving Osmond to his hospital appointments. As their relationship progressed, O'Hara began allowing Osmond to join him on his drug deals. Unknown to Osmond, the cannabis they were selling came directly from the evidence room and was being sold to another undercover officer. The whole point of this was to show Osmond that O'Hara was a lifetime criminal, to gain his trust and hopefully get him to talk about how he'd once gotten away with murder. But O'Hara was careful, never pushing Osmond too far, spending many nights talking about nothing and filling up 1,200 hours of secret recordings. Osmond fell for it. He began to love his new friend, who he'd come to treat like an all-weather ally. In October 2021, on one of the recordings, Osmond told O'Hara, "If I was getting married next week, you'd be my best man." It was around that time that Osmond started to talk about his ex, Holland, who he said had vanished one night and was never seen again. He didn't admit to the murder, but he told O'Hara, "She ain't gonna be seeing the light of day again. Don't worry about that." On another occasion, Osmond said that he'd been having nightmares about Holland and her, quote, black eyes. It was almost as though she was haunting him, and that could be exploited. Sometimes at night, they'd take walks down by the estuary, when Osmond would hint that this was where he once dumped a body. Little by little, he opened up, once saying that the cops were putting the puzzle together, but they haven't got all the bits. It wasn't until 2022 when O'Hara went in for the kill. He knew the murder was still troubling Osmond psychologically, so one night he said he asked outright. He knew it was tearing Osmond apart. Osmond trusted O'Hara like a brother. He went into the details, explaining that he arranged to meet her that night, making sure to choose a spot where there wasn't any CCTV. He said it was easy. He just grabbed her and used what he said was his knife skills to cut her body. He said he weighed the body down so it would sink in the water, hurt the clothes that he was wearing, and later put the knife in one of the other chef's kits. Osmond said he felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. O'Hara, always the perfect undercover, gave him a warm smile. That was the last time the two best friends met each other. In court, Osmond's defense tried to argue that plying a man with booze and coaxing him into what they said was a false confession was unfair, but the evidence stood and Osmond received a life sentence. In 2024, he launched an appeal, but it's unlikely that'll make any difference. Okay, so what happens when you cross a murderer with a group of fake hardcore gangsters? Number 2, a friend to gangsters. February 27, 1999, 12:45 a.m. 17-year-old Michelle Bright is last seen leaving a party of a 15-year-old friend in the small town of Goulgong in Australia's Part 2. One time a woman hired him to whack her violent boyfriend. When Johnson found out this guy regularly beat her, instead of sending her to prison, he put her in touch with social service agencies. He also found her a therapist and got her a place in a women's shelter. The defense in the trials would usually say Johnson manipulated his clients into requesting a murder, but he didn't see it that way. He once said, "That's all my job is, to help people open up, to get them to say what they really want, to reveal to me their deepest desires." He never killed anyone, but there is no doubt that Gary Johnson was the greatest fake hitman the world has ever seen. Which of these insane cop stories blew your mind the most? Was there one that left you speechless or had you on the edge of your seat? Let us know in the comments below. Now you need to watch victims who ended up being the bad guys, or have a look at this video instead. This is how to get in shape fast. With cyber attacks accelerating, effective cybersecurity has become mission critical for businesses, which is why over half of Fortune 500 companies trust CrowdStrike to protect theirs. With CrowdStrike, we solve complex problems by delivering the right solutions with our market-leading cloud security, identity protection, and next-generation technology. With the power of the crowd, our cybersecurity transformations save businesses both time and money. CrowdStrike, stop breaches.
When I heard the words, "You have advanced terminal cancer," my heart sank. I wasn't given long to live, and by the grace of God, I found the Avita Cancer Centers. They revolutionized my cancer treatment, and I'm alive 24 years later to tell my story. My name is Sandy Yozapovic, and as a wife and mother of 2 beautiful children and 1 grandchild, I'm proud today to be an ambassador for Avita Cancer Centers. To hear many more stories like mine, visit us at Avita.com. That's ENVITA.com.
No patient experience. Compensation will not provide insurance through individual results later in the consulting physician.
These drivers are a different breed. They're heroes and villains, pushing machines to the limit and unleashing emotions that can't be contained. The NASCAR Cup Series from Las Vegas, Sunday at 2 Eastern on FS1.
Well, you know, the Nasdaq's selling off, so you can expect big tech to be down across the board, and it is. Microsoft down $7, Amazon down 6, Nvidia $3, Apple's down 9, and we've got Alphabet down almost $7. The Nasdaq being driven lower by the sharp sell-off in technology. Today, Israel will send a delegation to Qatar. This is about a second stage of the ceasefire deal. Alex Hogan in Tel Aviv. What are both sides saying ahead of the talks, Alex?
Hi, sir. Good to see you. So both sides, both Israel and Hamas, have expressed optimism ahead of these talks in effort to reach a second stage of the ceasefire. We also know that officials from Qatar, from Egypt, and the U.S. will be part of these negotiations this week. Dozens of hostages remain being held in Gaza by Hamas. And we know from the U.S. envoy of hostages by President Trump, Adam Bowler, who said on Fox News Sunday that these U.S.-Hamas talks have focused on their release, especially the lone American hostage who is still believed to be alive. And today, just an hour ago, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff laid out a firm line of what they will demand from Hamas.
A starter is Hamas demilitarizing, not rearming, leaving all their arms on the ground, and leaving Gaza. That's the start.
Palestinians in Gaza say they are desperate for a second stage of the ceasefire, too. Israel yesterday halted the sale of electricity into Gaza. It comes about a week after
Both nations are in pain.
Iran is firing back at President Trump's letter demanding nuclear talks. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali saying the U.S. would impose its dominance on Iran's military and regional influence. Iran later went on to say that it would be open to negotiations if these conversations focused solely on the concerns around the militarization of its nuclear programs. Stuart?
Alex, thank you very much indeed. National Security Analyst Rebecca Heinrich joins me now. Rebecca, in my opinion, it seems two wars may be nearing an end. Ukraine, perhaps within days. Gaza, perhaps within weeks. We start with Ukraine. Special Envoy Witkoff says he hopes a minerals deal with Ukraine gets done this week. That sounds promising, Rebecca.
It sounds promising. Of course, the country that is standing in the way of peace is Russia. Since the United States has halted aid, in particular that intelligence to Ukraine during just this past week, Russia had launched over 2,000 aerial attacks against Ukraine. President Trump warned, listen, if Russia's going to continue acting this way and standing in the way of peace, we're going to crank up banking sanctions. So the threats from the United States towards Russia are now starting to pick up. So it's going to depend on how the Russians respond to this, because Ukraine is not the one standing in the way of peace at this point, Stuart.
You analyze these situations. Have we got a good chance of peace, a ceasefire, I should say, in a matter of days?
I'm hopeful that we're going to have a ceasefire. I think that the best we can hope for is some kind of more stable relationship between the U.S. and Russia. And first had to handle the Ukraine problem first. Clearly, Zelensky had to understand that he was not going to continue to control the narrative anymore, and that the United States really did need Ukraine to sign this minerals deal. But this minerals deal, Stuart, gives the American people a concrete economic stake in the security of Ukraine. It's the best path forward.
What about the possibility of, I don't know how to word this, not peace, but an extended ceasefire going towards peace in Gaza in a matter of weeks? What are the chances?
I think that the first stage is going to be the most productive stage, and so I'm hopeful that the United States can pressure the Hamas side, which is really the Iranian side, to release the rest of these hostages, these 59 hostages that are still there. There is not going to be peace until these hostages, the living ones, and then including the deceased. Of course, there's that one American hostage, Eden Alexander from New Jersey. We believe he's still alive. The American people want our fellow citizen home, and until that happens, there's not going to be a phase two, I don't think, Stuart.
So you can say that on both counts, there are promising developments, and you won't go further than that.
I think there are promising developments, but I think, as always the case, adversaries, the aggressors like Hamas and Russia, have to be made to understand that the costs of not collaborating are much higher than anything they think they're going to seek by continuing to be a problem towards the United States and our interests.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart.
Coming up today, RFK Jr. set to meet with top executives of major food brands. They're going to talk about dyes, seed oils, and package labels. We've got a report on it. Democrat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett says entering the country illegally is not a crime.
It is not a criminal violation to enter the country illegally. It's not a criminal. It's a crime. It's not a crime.
Borazar Tom Homan will set the record straight. Tom Homan is next.
Advertisement for DeferredTaxNow.com.
Are you tired of watching a big chunk of your money from the sale of a business or real estate disappear to capital gains tax? I'm here with Larry Spot, the financial professional. Larry, what's the secret to deferring all capital gains tax if someone's looking to sell real estate or a business, or maybe recently sold that asset?
Kevin, some strategies need to be planned before the asset is sold, while other strategies can be used after the sale. Tax deferral allows you to delay paying capital gains on the sale of a business or real estate, keeping more of your money invested and growing.
And if you're selling real estate or a business and have not yet closed on the sale?
In most cases, you can defer all capital gains tax, including federal, state, and Medicare, which in some cases can be as high as 30% or more. The goal is to hold on to what otherwise would have been paid in tax and invest those assets, which are also in a tax-deferred structure. In other words, defer paying tax on realized earnings after the sale, as well as defer tax on the sale itself. If you have capital gains exposure on the sale of a business or real estate, or simply trying to grow your investments tax deferred after the sale has already happened, call this number, 866-642-1722, or visit defertaxnow.com, and I will personally return your call and discuss your case.
That's 866-642-1722 or defertaxnow.com, and Larry Spott will personally return your call. That number again, 866-642-1722 or visit defertaxnow.com. The previous comments are no substitute for personal tax advice. You should consult your legal and tax professionals before making any financial decisions.
Need access to working capital for your business now? Revolut has you covered with fast and flexible funding options. Revolut approves businesses based on revenue and not your personal credit. Access up to $250,000 as fast as one business day. Once approved, funds are available on demand. Draw funds into your business bank account and only pay for what you use. There are no application fees, no origination fees, no maintenance fees, and no draw fees. The Revolut Flex Line is a revolving line where available funds replenish as payments are made. Don't let cash flow issues hold you back. Revolut also reports to Dun & Bradstreet to help businesses establish and build business credit. Join more than 10,000 business owners that use Revolut to grow their business. Revolut is rated excellent on Trustpilot with more than 800 five-star reviews. Visit tryrevolut.com today and see how your business can thrive. That's tryrevolut.com and apply today.
We planned our investments well for retirement, but I wish we had more cash.
Don't they know they're sitting on a gold mine?
No, they don't know that if you own a life insurance policy of $100,000 or more, you may be able to sell all or part of it to Coventry for cash, even a term policy.
Don't lapse or surrender your policy before finding out what it's worth. Call Coventry Direct at 800-236-3400 or visit CoventryDirect.com to find out if you're sitting on a gold mine. That's 800-236-3400. Call now.
Wake up with Mornings with Maria at 6 a.m. Eastern. Then, as trading begins, see how it all impacts your money on Varney & Company. Weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on Fox Business. Invested in you.
A sea of ready. Look at this. The Dow is down 300, but the NASDAQ really taking it on the chin today. It's down 500 points, 2.78%. Look at the cryptos. They're also on the downside this morning. I want to bring in Mike Lee. He's always on the show. We know him as a super bull on technology stocks, and he's with us on the phone. Are you suggesting that we buy into this downside move? Are you suggesting we catch a falling knife?
Well, it depends, Stuart. If you're invested in these names and you had been invested in these names, well over a year ago, when I started pounding the table, you're still well in the black. Okay, if you have missed the moves, then absolutely. You have some of the best companies in the world on sale. Google at $168. It's just down dramatically. Apple way off its high. Meta or Facebook way off its high. Nvidia sub 110. Look, when the market starts pulling back like this, the baby absolutely gets thrown out with the bathwater. And a lot of times you don't sell what you want, you sell what you can. Underneath the surface, lastly, outside of these Mag 7 names, these Mag 7 names were the crux of what momentum-based hedge funds and momentum-based investing strategies were based on. And we're going on almost a month of unwind, which is the largest devastation in the momentum and factor-based investing we've had in the markets in multiple decades. So when that happens, it's ugly, but there's been no fundamental change since Valentine's Day, which is right about when this started kicking off. So why now? What's different over the last few weeks that versus January and February? To me, the market market just didn't quite like NVIDIA's earnings. They're doubtful about... Go ahead, sir.
No, if the president says we might get into a recession, they've got all this uncertainty over trade, I think that's a pretty good case to be made just staying away from stuff for now until it settles down. But Mike, you've made your opinion known to us, and we appreciate that, and we'll see you again real soon.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Sure thing. Ashley, come back in again, please. I wanted to look at the movers. This is an obvious mover. It used to be called MicroStrategy. Now it's Strategy. They're the Bitcoin people. Down 11% out.
Yeah, take away the micro, just Strategy, the world's largest corporate Bitcoin holder.
Yeah.
Shown to be a strange boy, eccentric and yet very intelligent. Novak came from an extremely religious family and had a penchant for hurting and killing animals, often holding on to pieces of their bodies as trophies which he would sport around his neck. He would often try to frighten his classmates by taunting them with small animal carcasses and bones, and when that stopped scaring them, he would go one step further, purely to shock them. Novak always seemed to have intriguing yet sometimes disturbing stories to tell, with many of the children in the neighbourhood becoming somewhat fascinated by this strange individual. Interestingly, Sean was identified as the troublesome youth who often ran riots in the woods when younger children would play there, and initially, before bragging to classmates, police wanted to speak to him as a person of interest regarding the murders of Daniel and Scott. Novak was subsequently arrested on the day of Daniel Geyer's funeral and was held without bond pending a court hearing on March 11th, which was to determine whether the teen would be tried as a minor or as an adult. It was concluded that he would face a criminal trial as an adult. It came to light during Novak's questioning that he was obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons, and he claimed that the woods had become somewhat a fantasy land of his own. He referred to Daniel Geyer as a, quote, kender, a small-boned, green dwarf-like creature with pointy ears. He apparently referred to all of the children who played in the woods as these dwarven beings. On the afternoon of March the 5th, 1991, Sean spent time in the Birdneck Woods, as he often did, before engaging in conversation with Daniel and Scott, whom he had previously become acquainted with. The boys were fascinated by Novak's strange personality and hobbies, and according to Novak's testimony, Daniel started asking him about a knife he had in his possession, a buck knife with a bone handle. Daniel allegedly wanted to wield it, but Sean refused. It was at this point that Daniel and Scott managed to snatch the knife from Novak, which then engulfed him with a blinding rage. Daniel kept bugging me about wanting to see my knife, and Daniel had got out my knife and I freaked out, and then Scott began to scream. I wasn't mad, I was really scared because I had cut him from the ear. As he lifted the knife from his pocket, I grabbed him by the back of his shirt and I dragged him back and I stabbed him 4 times, and I slashed him too. Following the killings, Sean placed the bodies beside one another and covered their remains with pine branches and leaves. Novak admitted that his clothes were drenched in blood, as were his hands. He cleaned himself up and washed his hands in a puddle before fleeing the scene. Given these admissions and the evidence collected by investigators, Sean Novak was charged with 2 counts of capital murder and was placed on trial a year later in March 1992. The most likely punishment for him was to be either life imprisonment or capital punishment, newspapers citing the likeliness that he would meet his demise on the electric chair and would be the youngest person in Virginia to do so, but as it transpired, this was not the case. At the trial, Novak's lawyer presented insanity as a defence, stating that their client had felt he had watched the crime unfold from above and looking down, almost as if it was an out-of-body experience. Doctors who evaluated him declared it likely that the teenager was suffering from schizophrenia and that the darker side of his dual personality had taken over him, many stating he was possessed, but many did not buy this. The prosecution presented many witnesses who attested that Novak was not mentally ill, despite having macabre fascinations with dead animals, and the fact he appeared to believe he was in a fantasy land similar to that of Dungeons and Dragons. They were of the firm opinion that Sean had murdered in cold blood and was entirely sane when doing so. It was difficult to determine whether the crime had been premeditated. However, it's interesting to note that it was found that he possessed a number of newspaper clippings about murders and had a book about serial killers which he had taken out of a local library a short time prior to the slayings. One witness even testified to Novak's fiery temper when on one occasion when he was spending time at a friend's house, his mother, who was the witness, refused them permission to watch a film.
All Americans over 60 who have Medicare can apply at no cost. It can be used without restrictions to pay for drugs.
About infamous murderer and cult leader Charles Manson, which angered Novak. When she asked him why he was so upset, Sean said he, quote, idolized Manson. This witness saw Novak with Daniel and Scott at approximately 5:15 on March 4th outside a fast food restaurant, a short time prior to their deaths, according to police. She offered them a ride home, but Daniel told her he had to collect his bike from the woods first. Novak displayed no remorse at the trial and appeared very impassive throughout the week. When the subsequent verdict was delivered, he had nothing to say. The verdict was reached on March the 10th, 1992. The jury took only 90 minutes of deliberations to find the now 17-year-old Sean Novak guilty of murdering 9-year-old Daniel Geyer and 7-year-old Scott Weaver, a crime which the prosecutor described as, quote, merciless, bloodthirsty, and butchery. In April, Novak was sentenced to life imprisonment of 40 years to life with a minimum time of 25 years behind bars before being able to apply for parole. He was first put up for parole in 2012, however was rejected. Geyer and Weaver's parents managed to convince the parole board not to hear Novak's case for 3 years. A number of petitions were posted in 2015 when Novak was due to be reviewed again for parole. However, no further updates have been published in the media since, so we can only assume that parole has continued to be denied to Novak. Despite justice having been served, both Geyer and Weaver families will have to revisit the parole board every 3 years in order to keep Sean Novak behind bars until he dies. It's difficult to imagine how any family can even begin to move on from such a tragedy. We can only hope that both families will find some sort of comfort in the fact that both Daniel and Scott will never be forgotten.